Thank you, FIDO Alliance, for your hospitality. It's great to be here. I'm Dale Laszig, a staff writer at the Green Sheet, and as a payments industry journalist who's been covering the FIDO standard, I've been interested in strong authentication and mainly its potential to really enrich the customer experience. And when it comes to global deployments, as you all know, it's very complicated. There are many considerations. Maintaining a consistent brand message and communication across user preferences in different regions and regulatory landscapes. And I had the opportunity to discuss these topics with two industry leaders, Manish Gupta, Director of Global Security at Starbucks, and Tola Dalton, Director of Software Development at eBay. And I'd like to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves.
Hey, Dale. Thanks for hosting us, and thanks to the FIDO Alliance as well. I'm Manish Gupta. My pronouns are he and him. For last 4 years, I'm the Director of Global Cybersecurity Services at Starbucks in Seattle. My responsibility includes global strategy, product management, and operational execution for identity and access services at Starbucks. I'm driving kind of adoption and implementation of passwordless solutions at Starbucks, and also behavioral authentication solutions, and all towards the goal of gaining maturity in terms of zero trust setup. We look at these authentication improvements as considerable labor savings for all of our employees and customers. And that's one big consideration for how we are rolling these out, in addition to the security benefits they offer. Our core principle around these is always creating simple and secure identity solutions for our users. Also, I'm fortunate to be a customer advisory board member at Identity Security Alliance, where I get to shape the education and awareness on identity topics and drive initiatives like upcoming Identity Management Day. So just a plug in there for April 12th is the Identity Management Day for all our identity friends here.
And hi there, thanks to the Alliance, and thanks to you, Dale, for hosting this. I'm Tola Dalton. I lead identity engineering for eBay, and I've been working in identity for quite some time. I've been lucky to be with eBay and identity when we were one of the fairly early adopters of biometric authentication for our native app. And then more recently, we rolled out WebAuthn as really one of the first major e-commerce companies to offer this in a broad way. Rolled it out for millions of users so far. And we're really in the middle of our passwordless journey. We have a very large established user base, and I'm extremely passionate in advancing the passwordless vision and getting to what I see as a real industry turning point in authentication. So great to be here.
Great to have you. And when you're talking about your user base, millions of users and a very diverse customer base as well. What was the motivation for you initially to begin that passwordless journey?
Yeah, so there are a few motivations, really. It's that kind of important thing that there's more than one reason. If you look back several years now, the 2014 password breach that eBay had, really highlighted the advantage of not storing sensitive password data for us. That was a big hit to eBay's business and a big thing to go through. So that's usually one of the first things that's mentioned as the advantage of FIDO and passwordless. That was definitely very true for us, but it really goes a lot beyond that. Passwordless is a rare combination of an intersection of security and ease of use. Being in identity, being in authentication, you really, you're used to this kind of tug of war where you either make things really seamless and easy to use for the user, or you make them secure, and you constantly have to work with this balance. So this is something that really excites me about Passwordless and made it a reason why we needed to go this direction for our business, is that for one thing, accounts using Passwordless and particularly multi-factor auth are shown to have much lower account takeover rates. If you protect your account that way with more than just a password, then really it's multiple times less likely to get taken over. And that's a big consideration for eBay, and it would be for any e-commerce company, as trust is one of the kind of pillars that we need to establish with our users. So definitely the security angle is big, but the great thing about Passwordless is that it's also an incredibly seamless login method. And we're all familiar with the pain of forgot your password, specifically after some kind of password breach or other reason why you need to choose a new password. That pain gets even worse, but that's something that we want to get away from. Passwordless methods like biometric specifically are just so easy for the user, and it's something that users will a lot of times want to adopt, not just for security, but for ease of use. So really a few major reasons why we're going passwordless. And then the last thing I'd say is just it is a journey. Companies of this size, we have large established user bases. So it's not realistic to pivot on a dime to a completely passwordless world. We have diverse user bases as well, people who are used to ways of doing things and have different considerations. So it's a complex process and it's a journey.
Yeah, thank you. I know for myself as a consumer, it used to be exciting for me maybe 5 or 6 years ago to feel that my major brand really gets me. But how much more exciting is it to think that my major brand knows me and I actually feel seen and heard when I log into a website? I think it takes the customer experience to a whole new level. And considering that customer experience, Manish, I think that it must be incredibly challenging to deliver a consistent experience across so many geographic regions and regulatory landscapes. What advice do you have for other enterprises contemplating that type of global deployment?
Dale, that's a very insightful question. Thank you for that. So as you said, like we do believe in kind of unwavering commitment to user experience. And like I said earlier, right, our principles have always been to develop simple and secure solutions, and that extends to authentication solutions for sure. As we look at our commitment there, and what we get to is very close attention to even minute or small differences in experience. We are a stickler for getting it right most of the time. So based on some of the learnings, right, and you alluded to some, right, but we typically saw things that could be bucketed under either cultural norms, technical differences, or regulatory differences as we roll out things across the globe from an authentication perspective. In terms of cultural norms, what has happened is the different parts of the world, right, whether a person has a dedicated one-to-one smartphone or not, it's something that we take for granted here in the US, but not something that we can take granted across the world. The other is things like, are users comfortable using their personal phone for work, right? Again, something that varies significantly across the globe. In India, for instance, people don't think twice about using the personal phone for work. But in other parts of the world, it's very different. Also, in some places, right, like especially say if we go back, look at the example of India, people are very used to using a QR code for making payments. They've become more and more used to it over the last 2 years of pandemic. And as that happens, right, building a solution that combines authentication and payment into one cognitive step for the user would be a phenomenal thing. Users would just love it, right? It almost seems like authentication as a separate step has disappeared. So those kind of differences, right, and those kind of differences resulting from what's happening in general with application development across other areas are very important to kind of pay attention to. Similarly, technical differences, right? So different device types, different browser types, different are popular in different regions of the world. And for various reasons, right? There is, of course, local manufacturers of these devices that develop solutions that are very specific to that area. In case of China, for instance, right, the Google services are just not available. So when we're developing push to accept solutions for China for authentication, we had to go through a significant change to make sure our solutions worked with different China communication providers in absence of standard Google service that went across the board for all Android services for the rest of the world. So those are some of the differences from a technical perspective. But then as we kind of extend it further to regulatory differences, right? Like for instance, when you look at most of the Europe, they have strict labor regulations and regulations around whether personal phones can be used for work or not.
Okay.
Also, there with the Work Council getting involved in several different countries, even making changes to authentication steps or process could require a significant approval cycle, working with the Work Council, working with some of the other areas of the business. So those are the things that it just, as you go on this journey, and surely as a journey, as Tola kind of alluded to, right? You get to recognize these, and all of these are things that come up beyond just building the technical solution, right? And you have to be very cognizant of it. And other thing is these regulations change. So like with recent geopolitical scenarios, there have been sanctions that have been put in place, which prohibit certain encryption methods from being used in different parts of the world. So again, it's not just do it once and then you're set. These regulations, you also have to keep up with them because they do change. And same thing for like biometric, which is another popular factor. Tola alluded to it as well. It's a very convenient authentication factor, but then different states in US have different regulations on how or where you can use biometric or cannot use biometrics, just because of the privacy concerns. So yeah, it's a very happening space, and you just have to stay current to make sure that you are not stepping on minefields.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, it really sounds like a completely, like a patchwork quilt of fragmentation when you just go from one market to another, and all these competing devices, commercial off-the-shelf devices, not everyone allowing them at work, different browsers, different technologies. And then in addition to that, there's the customer experience. And Tola, you mentioned this too. You mentioned the need to be realistic about driving customer adoption. It has to be phased in. It can't be done. It can't just turn on a dime. But how would you recommend other companies motivate customers to use stronger authentication?
Yeah, Manish, you just said a phrase that caught my attention in your last answer of authentication as a step should disappear. And this is a theme I've heard before, said another way. A colleague of mine said, if we're doing our job in identity and sign-in, we basically just get out of the way. and from the perspective of the user, right? So that I think is the key in terms of how to motivate customers to use passwordless and use stronger authentication. Is, in my opinion, you need to make it easy and intuitive and convince the customer that this is actually an easy login method. Security benefits are there, and we should talk about them, but users will adopt en masse if the ease of use is there and if you can get that through to them. We've seen on 2FA, the industry has been adopting 2FA for a long time now, and unless it's cases where it's mandated, you usually get between 2 and 10% of adoption among your user base for 2FA. And naturally, we're going for a lot higher than that. We won't have achieved our goal unless we can get a majority of our users using strong auth, using passwordless. So similar with what we saw with WebAuthn, for example, we have a post sign-in way of offering this. The user logs in with their normal eBay username and password. We pop up a simple kind of message that basically says, "Hey, we have this great easy way of logging in from this device that you just do fingerprint or face, and it's easy. Yes, it's super secure, but you can enable it for seamless sign-in." And doing that, now we have millions of users who have successfully signed up. That's why I love biometric auth factors, is because they're a great example of this strong auth factor that you can also legitimately bill to users as seamless. So I think that's the key, is making sure that ease of use element is there and is talked about, and getting users to adopt for that, also knowing that it's making them more secure.
I like that idea of having a step-up challenge as part of the login stream. I think it makes it very natural, and it just makes it conversational. And I think it would really result in broader adoption. I know for me personally, I like two-factor authentication until it doesn't work. And when there's a push notification that I'm used to getting immediately, and then it suddenly stops appearing, and I have to make a phone call every time I need to go to a website, it becomes a little tedious. And that makes me wish we had more biometrics. But I know that, Manish, you mentioned that there's been a lot of disruption. You called it a seismic shift in authentication, with new entrants coming in and multiple approaches. How do you recommend that FIDO stakeholders can help drive consensus and move to an ultimate goal of uniformity and standardization?
Yeah, Dale, that's right. I think seismic shift is a good way to put it. Good or bad, right? Like for last several decades, or since advent of computers and internet, we have forced people into using username and password, and it has become kind of a de facto standard that everyone has gotten used to. So now we have to kind of manage it, and get to the other side of a different thing, whether it's better or worse. It's still a change that needs to be managed. And the current scenario, especially as people have been looking for a new, better solution to replace username and password, seems like a crowded field, right? User have to figure out a lot of new ways. It could be push authentication, it could be Face ID on the phones, it could be fingerprint readers, it could be magic links sent to them on email or SMS, it could be a code sent on SMS, just like you were mentioning right now. Or it could be apps that they have installed on their phone or at their desktop, which are continuously generating these short-lived tokens. We talked about QR code authentication earlier. So it's just too many things. And then there are, of course, for more advanced users, there's USB or NFC-based hardware tokens, right? So it's surely a lot of new things trying to capture that space now, which used to be user ID and password. So given that environment, I think what the work that FIDO Alliance is doing and the approach it's taking to establish a global standard, it's commendable. And the initial steps that they have taken, starting from early days of FIDO to now FIDO 2, and I think the biggest thing that has happened is they've been able to convince most of the significant device player, technology vendors, the browser providers, the OS providers, right? If you look through the list of top used in any of those categories, device, OS, or browser, I think FIDO Alliance has been able to build good relationship and traction with all of them. So that's kind of the first great step to getting to a ubiquitous kind of solution that could be global and that could be standard-based and secure. Where we go from here is more in terms of how do we standardize the actual implementation of the standard and the protocol. Not that we have caught everyone's attention, the standard is solid, there's buy-in, but how do we take it the step further and make the implementation of the standard such that it becomes muscle memory for people, just like user ID password login has been for years. So I think that's the next step. But where you go from there, right, is how do we further expand? Because authentication, like we know, being in the space, right, that it's critical and that's a significant thing. But for a user, when they think about a relationship with Starbucks or with eBay or any other vendors that they interact with, they are thinking of full end-to-end relation, which starts with registering account, making updates to their profile or to their authenticators, ultimately terminating the account at some point, right? So it's that end-to-end journey, including any interaction that they might have with the customer service representatives or help desk. And that whole journey needs to be uplifted with this new standards coming into place. And then finally, not so much for end consumers, but for the overall security of the solution, we also need to make sure how can we take the strong authentication approach that FIDO has created to expand it to machine-to-machine authentications or any kind of other non-interactive authentication flows, because most of the time the application has a need for both. And if you only protect one side with a strong authentication, other side remains using that old user ID password methods, we know what will happen next, right? That's the back door that will be compromised.
Wow, I so agree with that. And I agree also, it's commendable what FIDO has done to drive consensus among device manufacturers. I mean, you're talking about entities that fiercely compete with each other every day in operating systems and browsers, and get that whole community together and to agree on strong authentication and standardization of that. And what you just described as machine to machine, it almost sounds like science fiction. It's incredibly exciting to think about that, and the potential for strong authentication in the IoT. But to your earlier point, standardizing implementation, I know a lot of us in the industry, when we hear the word implementation, we brace for impact. And Tola, you mentioned there may be some bricks in the road ahead of us to the passwordless nirvana. So what do you see up ahead in the near term, and what are your recommendations for overcoming them?
So I'll be nice and specific here, and in terms of bricks in the road, talk about the phone not present scenarios. Many bricks in the road on the passwordless journey. as is with any worthwhile journey, but this is one of the big ones, I feel. So what I'm talking about here is, of course, the local device authentication with fingerprint or face, et cetera, is kind of the ultimate authentication that you hope people will use most of the time. But that's not always going to be available because people go between different devices and they go to new devices. You always end up routing back to the phone as kind of the fallback authentication. So if you don't have a nice local biometric, then you've got to have a notification sent to your phone and approve the sign-in with that, something like that. So several cases come into play. What if you've lost your phone? What if you have recently got a new phone? What if the phone's just in another room? This is everyday stuff that comes up for users, and we definitely can't ignore those scenarios. And the industry has different solutions for this. I feel like none of them are as seamless as it needs to be. We need to get a little bit better. We have backup codes. When you sign up, here's 6 codes, write them down somewhere, and if you ever get locked out, you can use them. We all know that losing those codes is probably a likely scenario there. Things like second phone number, give us another phone number that we can reach if you don't have your primary phone. That's a decent one. And then there's less secure methods like email. You can fall back on sending something to your email address, but like I said, that there's security concerns with that. So I think that's something that as an industry, we need to really look at the phone not present scenarios, come up with best practices that users can get used to, that can take care of those scenarios, so that they can feel confident in adopting the overall passwordless authentication and moving away from their passwords.
Thank you, Tola. That's a great point. And I know, Manish, you also mentioned that when somebody is changing a phone, or maybe they lost a phone, or they're just migrating from one device to another, that even when you have FIDO authentication at the front door, you could also have backdoor vulnerabilities. And what are your thoughts on that? And what are some ways that we can help protect consumers in that type of scenario?
Yeah, Dale, it's kind of interesting timing that we are having this discussion, right? Because we are almost seeing those backdoors unraveling in front of our eyes in real time with different attack tactics that the Laszig group is deploying, right? They're not attacking the strong, solid FIDO2 kind of authentication protocols, but they are finding these backdoors, which could be social engineering help desk or other employees at the company using the backdoor for password reset, or registering alternate authenticators, which flows which don't require the same scrutiny, or they could also be doing swim swap, right? They're deploying all of these tactics, and we are seeing all of these attacks happening in real time in today's world. So it's no more like a theoretical thing. It's something that's happening already. But beyond the actual compromise scenarios, right? I think the bigger challenge here is that for a person to change phone, or for a person to lose phone and then having to replace it, and it could be phone, it could be other FIDO devices, right? Authenticators. All of this is very valid life events, or just events that happen in people's journey. So they need to be addressed, and addressed in a similar secure manner that now we have protected the front door, which is the strong FIDO2 standard-based authentication. Because what I fear is, as users are getting kind of excited about the whole passwordless, and we are presenting it as a simple and secure way to kind of do things that they've done typically with user ID password, they will equally quickly kind of jump off that bandwagon, right? If they end up in a scenario where because of a simple event like changing a phone, upgrading their phone, losing their phone, they can't access their bank account, or they can't make a purchase at Starbucks or eBay, right? So those things they will quickly recoil. So what we need to do is kind of continue making inroads, take the same approach, the standard-based, strong, secure, simple solutions that we now deploy to make it easy, seamless transition when people have to replace their devices.
Absolutely, 100%. And I know as you've both noticed, the friction points and the vulnerabilities basically have slowed adoption, but I saw that just a few days ago, FIDO released a multi-device FIDO credential that allows, some people call it a passkey, but basically it allows a user to synchronize their user key across multiple devices, and including a password manager or an iCloud. Do you think, and I would like to get both of your perspectives on this, will this solve the phone not present scenario? How will it help drive adoption?
Yeah, I think it could be a big step, and it's a pretty exciting development. So, I was just talking about how you have your authentication on your primary device, and then once you wander off of that device, then you get into more phone kind of based authentication that where you have to deal with the phone not present scenarios. So something like this can really lessen the occurrence of going away from your primary biometric auth a lot. I think this could be really good. I would say it's not going to eliminate the phone not present scenarios and the need to solve that, but it's going to lessen the dependence on kind of fallback phone-based auth. And I think it's an exciting development to watch closely. Just like WebAuthn adoption among browsers and hardware vendors spread little by little, and has now reached a really good adoption point. This kind of passkey technology, it'll be interesting to see how it gets adopted and how widely this type of shared key kind of technology, or portable key technology, if you will spread.
Wow, thank you, Tola. And Manish, would you consider this to be a game changer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a step in right direction. It is attempting to solve the problem that we just talked about, especially for users who are fortunate to have multiple devices, right? It starts to create an automatic backup for them to maintain access when they lose one of their registered device, right? So I think it's going to be great. It also starts the discussion of kind of wrapping around another simplification layer to the overall experience, right? That's how I see it, right? Like as we go down on this journey of FIDO, and you're trying to register your different authenticators and different devices, and it's good to a point, but as you will get further and further into it, you might find that you have a box full of these FIDO authenticators sitting at your desk, right? With this kind of approach, passkey, where you're trying to centralize these authenticators, create a repository of them, create an options to back them up and restore on a separate device, you are kind of creating that simplification layer. So, but the usual caveats will apply, right, to work like this, right? What we'll have to be careful with is the simplification layer is not adding any kind of new vulnerabilities just because of that layer, right? And because we know the main protocol, the FIDO2 authentication protocol, is rock solid and it's good, right? And the standard is great and it's vetted. But now that these new layers that we're creating, we'll have to make sure that we don't degrade in the means of simplicity, don't degrade the security of the solution. So that's a watch out, but it's absolutely a good step. And then the last thing I would say is it's kind of taking this concept of creating a master key, right? And ultimately, we will all need to figure out how to protect that master key, be it, which in this case of passkey is your iCloud account, right? Could be a Google account or something, right? That because ultimately everything is getting into one umbrella, right? And so you will need to figure out how do you protect that one master key and what is the recovery for that master key.
Wow, that's an excellent point. And I think, considering everything that we've discussed, I think the word journey is an operative word here. It's definitely a journey, and one that just keeps getting better and better all the time. I really appreciate both of your insights, and I'm looking forward to sharing more in my upcoming lead article. Any last thoughts as we close out this session on the future, the passwordless nirvana we're all trying to get to?
First of all, just thank you. It's been a good discussion, and thank you, Dale, for leading it, and Manish for joining. One thought that I'd toss in here is something that I've experienced along this journey is the tendency to kind of fixate on the end state where you have the truly passwordless account. You have the user who does not have a password at all in their account, always authenticates via biometric and other passwordless methods, and kind of, okay, how do we get straight to that end state? One of the realizations that we've definitely had is there's really significant gains to be made along the way before you get to that end state. And this is something that if you have a really established user base, you kind of need to think about, because you can't just pivot straight to no one has a password. What I'm talking about is as you get users to adopt MFA, passwordless, FIDO methods, and as you get more and more users to use this as their primary authentication method, then you can actually start treating password logins differently. If you have a user who always authenticates via either WebAuthn or a notification to their phone, maybe backed up by a biometric, then if one day that user comes to your site and logs in via a password, you can actually say, okay, this seems fishy. We're actually going to step this user up and ask for an SMS code, something in that case. So you can get really good security benefits, even though you haven't removed the password yet from that user. You can kind of effectively do it by making use of this kind of knowledge of them usually logging in via passwordless methods. So that's great security benefits that we can make along the way, in addition to every time they log in with a passwordless method, then they're going to have a better chance of success than using a password they can forget and all of that. So yeah, that's one of my main takeaways that I'd throw in there is significant gains and significant incremental steps that can be made in this journey.
Thank you so much, Tola.
Yeah, so great points there to close up. So yes, I would like to thank you, Dale, as well, and the FIDO Alliance for the opportunity. But like as closing thoughts, I'll go back to what I often say. I often compare identity to gold, the element gold and metal gold. Gold, as you guys know, right, is the most malleable and ductile of the elements or metal that we have. And you see gold being used, being like made really thin and soft like hair, or made solid like a brick, or combined with other elements to come up with different applications for it, from medical treatments to jewelry to whatnot, right? Identity is very similar, right? Identity as a discipline is very similar. You can combine with other technologies to make it an enabler for e-commerce or for socioeconomic efforts, or as a protector when viewed from a cybersecurity lens, or a key component of digital transformation of the world, right? The possibilities seem endless every time you start thinking of what identity can do. And within identity, the thing that most closely touches the end user is authentication. That's what they touch and feel and kind of have to go through to access whatever they're trying to do. So I think it's really important that we continue to maintain the right balance of elements like usability, communication, branding, and security when thinking about authentication experience. But then at the same time, also extend our thinking to full end user experience involving things like registration, identity proofing, updates to the identities over time, termination of the identity, help desk experiences, and not just pigeonhole ourselves to authentication. So that would be my kind of the closing thought there. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. I love that analogy of comparing security to a precious metal. And I think my parting shot would be the FIDO Alliance and the FIDO standard is absolutely the gold standard in authentication. Thank you both very much.